Okay, thank you for that nice introduction. Julia gets to give the toast tonight. Um, so it's great to be here. Jeff Collins, this is the end of the day, obviously, so we knew we'd have a smaller crowd. So the people who are here clearly want to learn a little bit, and I really want to learn a little bit more about some of these challenges. So let me kick it off. You've all seen the panel name. To kind of set the context, I've been doing trust and safety for over a decade, and we have always faced problems of companies working in silos, companies, governments, organizations categorizing and reporting harms differently and not sharing effectively. And this is a big problem because an issue like CSAM, this is a transnational problem. Criminals do not stop at borders. We clearly need to work cooperatively on these issues. It's been the theme at this conference throughout the years. So we are going to get a bit into this today. And just a couple quick anecdotes. When I was working at a prior company, one of the things I saw was we would have an emerging issue, crisis, problem. It could be misinformation related to an election. And we would literally back channel from company to company, like the senior people doing trust and safety, because we did not have a good mechanism to share information. And it was really frustrating, but there were just a lot of limitations. I think we've come quite a long way in the last 10 years. GIFCT launched about 10 years ago. I don't know the exact date, but it launched in San Francisco. We now have GIFCT as a great mechanism for sharing information and helping companies get information rapidly, essentially standardizing the way we report and share information. We have the Tech Coalition, which has been really helpful for tech companies, tech industry companies to learn, share technology, and essentially follow best practices. Those have been really big improvements, but I think we are now in an era. We've heard a little bit about this at the conference, but we're in an era where AI is essentially democratizing the ability to commit harms, illegal activity, and abuse at scale. And we, as a trust and safety profession and as a cross-sectoral, multi-stakeholder group who cares about these issues, I think we really need to update and accelerate what we're doing to work on these issues together. Because if we don't, we're just going to see a massive rise in harms. So we've got three really amazing panelists here to talk about some of the work that they're doing that will help us address these gaps, address these problems. So let's get into it. I'm going to ask each of them to just do a brief introduction, who they are, what their organization is.
Okay, so I'm Régis Villette. I'm a senior warrant officer for Gendarmerie Nationale. I'm the deputy head of offenses against person department for our national cybercrime unit. And mostly more interesting for our topic, I'm leading the national French database for CSAM material since 2008 until now, and not planning to change. So we receive all the data that is seized in France from police and gendarmerie in order to analyze it and to identify victims and offenders. Mostly I say victims first because it's our main topics. Our main goal is to identify the victims. Of course, we identify abusers, we're happy with this, but our main goal is the victims first.
My name's Samantha Wolf, and I'm the Executive Director of INHOPE. INHOPE is the global organization of internet hotlines. So we have 57 hotlines in 52 countries around the world. There are quite a few unfamiliar faces in here. So just to be clear, a hotline is not a place you call. It's a place to which the public reports child sexual abuse content. So these 57 hotlines around the world are NGOs or regulators, trade bodies. They're different types of organizations that have a platform to which the public can report this content. And we work very closely with national police like Regis and also Interpol and other international law enforcement agencies and industry to remove this content. So I'm really happy to be here, and you'll hear more about what I do and what these guys do a little bit later.
Hello, my name is Tobias Knecht. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Abusix. We typically work with ISPs and hosting providers and helping them to manage abuse in their networks and help them to make sure that their customers are not being abused or that get informed about abusive behavior that comes from their home computers or from their servers. So as you already see, I'm a little bit more technical in this round. So we started something that we're talking about later on called XRF, the Extended Abuse Reporting Format, a while back, and as a part-time job, so to speak, I'm also chair of the RIPE and security working group, or a former anti-abuse working group, and in a few other industry bodies in this regard.
Awesome, thanks. So we're going to start with a bit of the history to set the context. I mentioned how there are a number of gaps, but I would love to hear from each of you, in your perspective, what are some of the consequences, essentially negative consequences you've seen with us having lack of standardization in how we classify abuse, define it, report it. So we can really start with any of you jumping in, but I would love to hear some of your experience and what hasn't worked and what are some of the gaps we're trying to address.
I will start with some overview. So basically the first part that we get from law enforcement perspective was first to define what is CSAM really, because depending on legislation it will be completely different. So our point of view has to be changed. We had also I had to figure when I started also cultural issues, because from my point of view, having a kid who is nude from the bottom, walking on the street is not an abuse, of course, but it's an image that could be disturbing. It could be taking consideration that probably I will find CSAM related to this kid. But when you talk with Chinese people and you learn that it's a way for them to educate the kids to go to the toilets, and then you realize it's linked to their culture, so this picture is completely normal and regular and mandatory in their culture. So then you need to adapt your point of view. And also you need to consider age of consent. I know for some countries, and all this kind of stuff, even legal issues with homosexuality, for example, in some countries, that even a victim can be punished for this. So we need to consider all this stuff first. And then we need to consider how we can talk together with our partners, because we need to have the same point of view. I don't want to have, for example, analysts from INCYBER to deal with the content, but we will talk later on how we are working closely in order to have more details from them and not lose what they can see that can help us to identify the victims. We don't want them to do our job, but if they can give us some clues that they will have to see and they will see in their daily job, it should be useful not to lose it. And that was the part that we were facing until Seaport, we will talk about later, that they can find some details, but they don't have any way to give us this information.
Yeah, thank you. I would say that looking forward, so you were asking about solutions, standardization. Obviously, one of the things that we're here to talk about is standardization. But if we're looking backward, I would say, or not backward, but where we are today, I'd say fragmentation. And that is one of the things that we're here to kind of solve. And INCYBER's been doing that through various means. And fragmentation, Regis touched on legislative fragmentation. So understanding that consent, what is illegal in different countries, that's the fragmentation kind of outside our own organizations. Also, the silos you talked about in the beginning, the silos that we have with other organizations. We're all kind of working alone. We talk about working together, but people aren't doing this enough. Organizations, companies, industry isn't doing this enough yet. We can all do better. And then there's also technical, which is one of the things that we're here to talk about, and Tobias will talk about this more, but technical fragmentation. And one of the things about technical fragmentation is that when we look at kind of when INCYBER was started in 1999, and on the one hand, it was kind of started to mitigate fragmentation, but it was already, the foundation of it was almost too fragmented to continue not being fragmented. So now, 20 years, 2 decades, or 5 years ago, when we started looking at how we could really make sure that we could mitigate that fragmentation and look at standardization, we looked at inside our house and we said, what's wrong inside this house? And we understood that already we had 14 different ways that hotlines were reporting to industry. Different requests for notice and takedown, different notice requests for takedown of content. So we needed to look inside our house as well as looking outside our house for help and building or using the open source technology of those that have come before us and those that have been working in this area, like Tobias, we've been able to build on that towards, and looking forward now, towards a way in which we can together standardize, look at having the same language. This is something that I'll also talk about later, which is something that INHOPE has developed called the schema, which is a shared language and talking the same language so that whoever is classifying the content, whether it's an organization, law enforcement, or hotlines, they are all talking the same language no matter which jurisdiction that they're sitting in. And I don't know if people here have heard about the Universal Classification Schema, but please search INHOPE and the Universal Classification Schema to learn more about it. And what we need is law enforcement, industry, and hotlines to really come together on this. And this is one of the things that AWS has been doing with us and has understood the pioneering technology and game-changing way in which the schema can help industry receive this content faster, the interoperability of this content, of the methodology, and by doing that, find children quicker, potentially by providing actionable intelligence to law enforcement, remove content quicker, ensuring that there's less re-victimization, less traumatization re-traumatization for survivors. And all of this together, these are the ways that we need to move forward together. And this is our chance to move together. So having looked at what was wrong in our own house, we then tried to, building on with our colleagues and everybody, all the stakeholders in this area, we have also created another project notice, which we're working with AWS on, which is this building on what Tobias has created, which I'll let him talk about in 30 seconds, which is this standardized format of industry understanding and being able to use to receive the same reports from everybody so they don't have to try to decode. And the same with the police, so that this is what Seaport is, which Regis will talk about, also so that they don't have to decode and so that they can spend their time on investigating and potentially removing children from harm.
Got it. I want to come back to the schema, but first, Toby, I think I'm allowed to call you Toby. Tell us, let's just finish out the history and current state. And I think a lot of this relates to why you formed AbuseX. So what were some of the problems that you were seeing with the lack of standardization and reporting?
So that's a good question. And when we're not only talking about content abuse, at AbuseX, we're talking about any kind of abuse. We're talking about spam, phishing, which is content, child exploitation, which is content as well, but also DDoS attacks, and so on and so forth. And we know that about 95% of those attacks globally come from ISP networks, hosting provider networks, telco networks. And so now you have this huge amount of companies that are responsible for all that badness happening within their networks, and you start reporting information to them and say, hey, this spam email comes from your network, or this content is being hosted in your network. And so you run into exactly two problems. The first one is a ton of ISPs, hosting providers, and those companies do not care. They have no legislation in place. Even in Europe, it's still a little bit, not as it should be, in my opinion. But they don't care. And then usually, what happens is that then companies come up with excuses that are sometimes okay as excuses, so to speak. So they say, hey, we receive 100,000 reports per day. All of them are different formats. How would we ever? We have people sitting there, have to read through this, and so on and so forth. So if you're going to get into a problem at that scale, you need to start automating. But automating is only doable if you have some kind of standardized language that you can use. And so this whole project about XR started a long time ago, about 10, 12 years ago, where we said we need to have a standardized format that is different from what threat intel providers typically use. Because just to put that in relation, threat intel providers go deep on the knowledge. They want to know everything about a certain problem. the hosting provider or the ISP does not need to really understand what the problem exactly is and how it looks like and what gang is behind it. They need to know where in my network is something problematic and how can I pull the plug, or how can I inform the customer to fix this issue so it goes offline as fast as possible. And so that was kind of the idea of XRF. How can we build a standardized format that covers all bases, from technical abuse through content abuse, through copyright infringement, trademark things, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, this whole game, as I would call it, is about how can we take away excuses from those parties that are responsible for those things but that don't want to move. And building a standardized format is one. There's plenty more, but a standardized format is one of them, where you can say, now you have a standardized format, automate, do what needs to be done, and take care about those things. To make a difference, so to speak.
Your comments on scale resonate with anyone at AWS, because we haven't seen scale until we started working there, and so we're one of these companies that get hundreds of thousands of abuse reports, right, and have customers, who themselves get those abuse reports. So we really do see how you need to think about these problems differently to really address abuse at scale. So Samantha, can I come back to you?
I was just going to respond to what you're saying.
Yeah, please respond, and I would love for you to break down a little bit the classification schema and explain to people more about not just how it came about, but what it is and how it works.
Yeah, no, just to respond on what you were just saying, I was speaking to a company a few years ago, and they said, yeah, we have absolutely no child sexual abuse or exploitation material on our site. And I said, have you started flipping rocks? And it wasn't until, 6 months later, and they came back and they're like, yeah, sorry about that. And because they'd wanted to have a partnership with us, and we couldn't give them a partnership until they kind of proved a few things to us. So yes, until you start looking. Yeah, okay. Just wanted to make that comment, thank you. On the schema. So the schema, it's a unified rule that allows any organization, as I mentioned before, to classify content and share hashes and metadata consistently, regardless of their jurisdiction. So I've written something down exactly how it works, because I didn't want to, I hit my head quite hard yesterday, and I didn't want to not be clear with you about how the schema works. So just to explain, if INHOPE holds the mapping of the schema, or the ontology of the schema, to the national definitions of illegality, we know that schema labels, A, B, and C, compound to an illegal definition in the national jurisdiction. So that means, in turn, the law enforcement agency, for example, Regis's law enforcement agency, would be able to prioritize the reports that are either prioritizing victim identification, for example, or if they have met the illegality threshold in that country. So this is how schema works. So we schema categorization in every country. However, it's classified. It's still classified as in a way that everybody else can understand, so the same language. So even though we're all speaking different languages, it's in the same language, which goes to this the same reasoning as the XRF. If law enforcement or an industry receives something that has been categorized within the schema, then of course they are going to be able to, it's going to be in the same way, they are going to be able to understand, because of that standardization, they're going to understand how to, what needs to be done. They're going to be able to react faster. They're going to, as I said earlier, remove a child from harm. They're going to be able to remove that content. And it's also a way of making sure that across different platforms, responses will be quicker as well. And that's something that the Tech Coalition that Jeff mentioned has been working on through a project of theirs called Lantern. But this cross-platform response is really quite essential. Without it, we're kind of going backwards and not forwards. And this also makes regulatory compliance more possible, which is something that a lot of industry partners are facing at the moment, of course. So these are all different reasons that the schema makes this language and this interoperability essential for us today. And if it's okay, I'll pass straight on to Regis to talk to you about Seaport, which is kind of proof that standardization works and proof that this way of it's using the schema in a certain way, but proof that this standardization of how hotlines and law enforcement and ultimately industry too are working together.
You're doing my work for me.
I know I am. I'm really sorry. I'm kind of
we're
used to being a moderator. Sorry.
Just coming back to the schema, it was defined because we took all kind of images and videos we get from law enforcement and in open analysts, and we defined which kind of criteria can be used to define this schema and to be sure that we all have the same agreement on how to define it. And then it starts with Seaport. Seaport is a project that is used to work together with INHOPE and law enforcement for a different point of view. You have a point of view, you have one part that is dedicated to notice and takedown, to be sure that we as law enforcement get access to what INHOPE analysts send to service providers in order to remove the content. And we have also a VID, victim identification part, which is more from our side, to get access straight away to the content that has been advised to INHOPE, reported to INHOPE, and then we can go there quickly and get the content more quickly in order to identify the victim as much quicker as possible. So thanks to the schema, we work also together. We had a training course together with law enforcement and INHOPE partners. So each time it's one or two analysts from INHOPE in each country, and then law enforcement also from the same country working together, in order also to enhance this collaboration between INHOPE partners and INHOPE representative in each country and law enforcement in this country. We are lucky in France, we have quite great cooperation between Point Contact, which is INHOPE in France, but it's not the case in all countries. So thanks to this project also, it enhances collaboration between NGOs and law enforcement that is necessary. So Seaport gives us access to information. As I mentioned, I will talk about Point Contact. So their analysts are allowed to view the content in order to be sure if it's illegal or not before sending the notice and takedown. And when they saw something, they can, for example, saw this bottle and recognize the product and the brand. And if they realize it should be in, I will say, in Germany, and they saw something from outside or something specific that could be in a region in Germany, they don't have any way before Seaport to give it to someone, unless they send an email to Interpol and say, I saw this based on this image, because all the data goes to Interpol. Everything is inside Interpol's facilities, and they can get access to this information, but it takes time, it's losing information. And so the process is to give access to INHOPE analysts to have a checkbox when they can say, I have something for victim identification, and put a memo. And then from our side, we get access to everything that is hosted in our country and in the future, to everything that could have been taken in our country, so with victim or abuser from our country. So we don't have access to everything because we don't need to have access to everything, and we don't want because it's too much data, to be honest, and we need to work each country on this side, but it gives us access to information that are related to a country that can save time. And we also increase our partnership with Point Contact because they receive a lot of reports, so they can see hosting providers that are increasing or popping up, that we have one now image hosting provider in France that is popping up a lot in darknet and is used to share CSAM. So they give us access to this information quicker because we have this partnership. So we get the information from Seaport, but now we also collaborate together straight away to get more information and to have access to their report and to know even the statistic about how much information they receive and the reports they receive for these providers.
Regis, when did you start using the schema? And then I'm curious, who else is using it now?
So I think we start the schema, we start to talk about 5 years ago, I think, something like that. It took a long time to work all together, to have a proper definition in English for every kind of word. Yes, every kind of word. Now it's a process to translate it in all languages as much as possible. That will take time also. So I will say we use it since 3 years. We start to use it since 3 years. It's working.
You were one of the first adopters.
Yeah. I was involved also in the definitions. Yes. That took a lot of time for me because in English it was more difficult. Just kidding. But yeah, and we start to train people since 2 years ago. analysts and law enforcement.
Yeah.
With the support process, we start to train people on this way also to how to define. And we start, 3 years ago, we start with another project from Interpol in order to work with AI to help us. That would be a next step.
And just to explain that the schema training that we give to hotlines analysts, we have 220 hotline analysts around the world that we give to the analysts and law enforcement and industry partners who want it. It comes from Interpol, as well as we have some hotline ambassadors, but it's Interpol who actually trains on that.
Got it. It's really an amazing testimonial.
Yes, no, and Regis
how
is
it's
the best
working.
advocate for it. And he also talked about, and I was going to talk about it too, the way that hotlines and law enforcement are brought together, because hotlines and law enforcement, and when we set up a hotline in a country, they have to anyway have a memorandum of understanding, the hotline with law enforcement that comes from the Ministry of the Interior or wherever law enforcement sits. And so they already have to have some kind of relationship. It's true that in some countries it's much better than others, and obviously Regis, we have a very good relationship with that law enforcement agency, and we're trying to strengthen it in others. But this, because the law enforcement have to be, in each country, law enforcement officers have to be trained, the same as the hotlines. It's another way for them to enhance their relationship, for them to be brought closer together, and for Seaport to work by the hotline having that very regular contact to say, oh, well, there's this image, come into ICCAM being our technology platform that's hosted at Interpol, but come into ICCAM and just check this image, please. There are standard protocols, the way this happens, but it's actually not rocket science, which is what makes it so amazing. It's actually very simple. It's taken a long time to get here. And I can't say anything more about the schema without just saying that it is the brainchild of a law enforcement officer from Australia called Scott Anderson, who still works very, very closely on it. He's really developed the ontology with another colleague from Poland, one of the hotline analysts there. But it's really their brainchild. But many schema committee expert members like Regis have been working on it, as he says, for about five years. And 3 years ago, yes, they started using it, but a lot of people, I'd say maybe 2 years ago more, and we're still really pushing for it to be used by industry. So if any industry representatives are here today, then please do look it up and request the manual on our website.
Yeah, it's really something that all of us need to share and raise awareness at these conferences and all of our meetings, interactions. Toby, the Seaport idea is really interesting. I'm just wondering what do you take any lessons out of that you can apply to XARF and this idea of enriching reports with additional metadata? I'm just wondering how you think about that.
So absolutely amazing groundwork, and I think this shows that there is different levels and different layers of parties that are part of this solution. At the end of the day, we are not necessarily working too deep with law enforcement on one hand, but law enforcement is more or less or can be one organization that detects those things. But only detecting them is not, nothing's going to happen if you just detect and say, yeah, I found it, and then move on. And so I think then the next step becomes, how are we being able to get to where it sits, where it's being hosted, where the issue is being stored at the end of the day. And so then it becomes interesting because we are not necessarily, or ISPs and hosting providers are not necessarily interested in all the data that law enforcement and INHOPE is looking at, because obviously there's legal requirements. You cannot have people in a hotline at a hosting provider that are not educated in looking at things like that, look at those things. And this is exactly what I meant earlier. There is kind of an abstraction layer. How do law enforcement and INHOPE speak with each other is one thing. Is this party, when they detected something, speaking to hosting providers and ISPs is a completely different thing. And so while we can obviously learn from what they're doing and enrich data to a certain extent, we are trying, or XARF is as mentioned, is extendable, but we're trying to at least give the minimal required information data to a hosting provider and ISP, so they can at least do something. But we're not necessarily based in kind of giving all the details, because it's not necessary and makes, and from a legal perspective, in some cases, it is tricky. But what it shows is that even if you have, and this is true not only for child exploitation or for phishing, it's the same. Threat intelligence companies have way more data about a threat and what it does, but for the ISP and hosting provider, at the end of the day, it's about how can we take that offline. We don't need on how it was engineered and which group or which gang or who is the person, who is the person behind it. That's not interesting for a hosting provider and ISP. So I think it's important to keep those layers apart and make the best out of each of the layers to make it automatable and to make it really good processable.
Got it. That was a good, clear explanation. Thank you. I think we have about 10 minutes left. I have a few more questions, but if anyone has questions, please you can raise your hand. We can pass around a microphone. So be thinking of questions. But I want to, in the dwindling time here, I want to ask a little bit about the future state. So you have been working on these really important and amazing solutions to really tough problems that, as we all know, have a tremendous real-world impact. But in some senses, while we're working on these solutions, the ground is shifting underneath us with agentic AI. And I would love to hear from you. I know this is on everyone's mind to some extent, but like at AWS, we're thinking about the future of how abuse gets reported to us, if it's going to be reported by a bot, and then if the abuse is conducted by a bot, it's going to be like bot on bot abuse and reporting. So there's a lot to unpack there, but how do you think about, let's start with you, Toby, kind of the future proofing of XRF? Like how does what we're seeing now possibly impact what you've built or not?
So XRF itself, and by the way, if you want to learn more about it, xrf.org is the URL. It's completely for free. If you want to participate and have ideas, please join in. I don't think, and this is the interesting piece about it, we built XRF as a really standard format based on text, on classic standards that have been around on the internet for 25 years, 30 years, 40 years. So the bot stuff is not necessarily impacting us too much. What the impact is about is, again, the more abuse we have that is bot generated, the more it needs to be reported. So the volume will go up. So you guys at AWS, you will most likely see way higher volumes over the next few years than what we have, or that you guys have seen so far. On the other side, obviously, you can use AI for processing to a certain extent as well. But I don't think that it's, so we always say as long as you can detect it, you can report it. And I think AI will do that on two sides. I think AI will help on, will be a good thing and a bad thing. It will be a bad thing because we will see way more AI abuse. We will see way more auto-generated or generated AI-generated pictures. We will see more phishing sites. We will see more spam. We already do. We already see those type of things. Where it also will help is it will also help in detection. If you go down to the floor and walk around, every company is doing anything with AI. So it's going to be there. It's going to be detecting. So the volume of abusive behavior goes up. The volume of detected abusive behavior will go up. The volume of stuff that you guys at AWS and your trust and safety team have to handle will go up as well. And at the end of the day, it's the question on how can we, when I say we, as a community here that is trying to do the good things, how can we kind of keep up with that? And every party needs to be keeping up with that. And I think this is the important thing. I think AI will not change generally from what we did. It will just make the volumes way higher. And as I said, as long as you can detect it, you can report it. And if you can report it, somebody can do something about it if they're up to speed with the volume that they're getting.
Makes sense. Samantha, there's a lot of media reporting on AI-generated CSAM. How does this impact the classification schema or more broadly, the work you're doing?
I think how it impacts the schema, I'm going to let Reggie answer. More broadly on the work we do, it's obviously both police and for hotlines, it's incredibly difficult because it's so close. I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but obviously AI is so good now, you can't often tell the difference. So we obviously don't want police to be seeking someone who doesn't exist as a victim. Police don't want to be doing that. So we have to be very, very careful about what we're reporting to industry. Industry should, and in many countries it's illegal anyway, to have AI-generated CSAM. So industry has to remove this content anyway. So for the details of the schema, I'll let Regis talk about it. As Tobias said, what can be detected can be removed also using AI now. And you talked about AWS. Of course, industry in all areas of industry these days needs to be in a position to remove this content as soon as possible. But looking at these standardized forms, this is a way in which we can make sure that that volume that you're seeing and that other platforms are seeing and other companies are seeing, this is a way to make sure that you can scale up in that response. And that's one of the things, as I said earlier, it's not rocket science. It's been complicated to develop, but once it's there, Tobias talked about the simplicity of the XRF. These forms and these formats, this standardization is something that we have to have. And also, as Tobias said, we have to come together. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to safeguard children. We have to come together. This is our chance to make sure that we do work together in the same direction for that interoperability. Otherwise, industry is going to be, creating separate, continue to silo as they create hash lists and things like this. So this is really our chance to make sure that we actually collaborate in action and not just in word.
Really well said. There's a lot of talk about cooperation, but what you're doing is on the ground where the rubber meets the road proof, an example of what we actually need to do. And we're going to need more of this as you say, the numbers are just going to continue to increase.
Yep, so from our side, AI has been useful at some point because we use it to train it to analyze all images and videos based on the schema. So we use the schema, we use images that are from our Interpol databases in order to train AI, to detect and to categorize for us. So now we can focus on real CSAM and abused material in order to identify victims. And then AI-generated material arrived, and that killed us. Yeah, it's true, because we need to focus, and in the past it was easier, yeah, when you have 6 fingers or 3 arms and you detect it's AI-generated. Now you can't detect it by yourself. You feel something is wrong, but you can do it images by images when you have 10 terabytes of images to analyze. So you need to have something helping you. So we have tools that have been developed and are still developed in order to identify if this content has been generated by AI or not. But it's helpful because we focus now on victims that are real, that have been abused, in order to identify them, to safeguard them. But I have some things that I'm used to say since, I would say, 1 year. What's happened if I am an abuser? I know that law enforcement is willing to identify real victims, so they will not focus on AI-generated. So I will just throw it through an AI tool, and I will get my data with AI marker on it, tags on it, and then when it's arrived to our law enforcement or even other process, it will be detected as AI-generated. So nobody will work on it to identify the victims. So it's something we will have to figure in the future how we can work with this. So for the moment, we are at the steps that we detect it should have been AI-generated, so we put it beside. But we still have to analyze it just to be sure that we are not missing something. We have a lot of cases now since a year with a lot of AI-generated content, or nudified content, I would say mostly. We have one case with a guy that was running a server just to create AI-generated content on demand for some abusers. So we know that for these purposes only, everything was completely AI-generated, but we have many cases now with data that has been nudified by AI. And when you talk to the child, that is the real child on the picture, that has been nudified, or to his parents, for them, the issue is the same. That is the kid that has been taken nude on picture. It's even worse because they say that it's not my kid, but it could be him. So what's happened if the picture is still on the internet now? What will happen for him or her in the future? So it's something that we really need to figure how we can work with it and how we can use AI to help us, and also be sure that AI will not be too much used to create content that could be the wrong one.
Big challenge. Does anyone have any questions? Do we have a mic?
Yes.
All right.
Is there a hand somewhere?
And I don't see anyone yet kicking us out.
Which is you. Keep going.
So thank you for this wonderful conversation. I'm fully on board with most of what has been said on the panel today. I have one question, which I believe is the most important lever in terms of delivering efficient reporting systems. How do we encourage users, and when it comes to young users, those who care for them, how do we encourage them and make sure that they're actually reporting? Because there's a solid base of evidence and research evidence that shows that much stuff goes underreported or unreported. So how do we fix this aspect of the problem? Thank you.
I would say it's mostly a prevention issue that we mostly all faces, because we need to talk even with kids and with parents, because most of the parents are not aware of the risk that their kids are facing. Kids, we have a talk this morning about violence and hybrid threats, and it links also to this. They learn everything from internet. They don't ask people to teach them. They learn everything from internet and from AI, thanks. And so everything came from things that come from internet without any verification, that they don't know what they are really doing. So to tell them that they need to report is something that we need to work on it and to make more prevention campaign. You have some campaign in the past, like Say No campaign from Europol, to explain some kind of risk that they can face on internet, but it's something that are not so much used, at least in France. So we work on it to make more prevention campaign. We are working, at least I do a video with one of the best French YouTuber to explain what are the risks for kids, what the parents has to do, and what also to help potential abuser to be helped. And most of the time I'm used to say that they will know that they have made something bad, because of course that's the way the abusers will tell them that it's your fault. So that's why they don't want to report, because they are facing that it's their fault. So that's the first point, that even if you do a mistake, just say it to something. So it's easy to say it now, it's not easy to find the best way to tell it to the most of possible kids.
Are you talking about reporting yourself if two 14-year-olds, one or two children, one of them shares images after they've broken up or something? Or are you talking about just reporting of child sexual abuse material? Generally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's obviously a big question, and I don't think anyone really knows the answer. Regis talked about it, communication, and I think that most of the platforms have a safety resource center to raise awareness. InHope, when it was started in 1999 under the Safer Internet program, a European Commission-funded program, it was started with as part of a safer internet center. So three elements, you're nodding, so maybe you know. There are safer internet centers, slightly problematic at the moment, but there are safer internet centers in all European countries, and they are made up of a hotline, a place to which you can report content that we've been talking about today, a national awareness center, so those centers that have developed those campaigns that Regis talked about, those awareness-raising campaigns, and a helpline, a place to which children or adults can report, but mostly children to report if they're coming across something that they don't want to. And it's now, that Safer Internet program has now become the Better Internet for Kids network, and there are huge amounts of resources, but I agree that the problem is that we are constantly seeing that there are more and more resources being produced, but people aren't accessing them. So therefore, I think the problem, people need to go into school. I have a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, and the first time anyone has been into my child's school, last week a policeman went in. And that was the first time I talked to them about this stuff all the time, obviously. But it was the first time anyone had gone into their school. I live in France, by the way, as Régis knows. It's just to say, and France does have a safer internet center. So if even here we're talking about that problem, I think it's significant everywhere. And I think that we need to focus more on parents and caregivers and teachers, because the children aren't that interested themselves. They don't know what to report, why to report, that it's illegal, that they can even report it. They are things that they really need to know. And that needs to be, we need to put that up on billboards. I'm obviously, as you can tell from my accent, from the UK. The NSPCC is something nobody doesn't know about growing up. And that is what we need, but for reporting, for hotlines as well. And obviously we give, as InHope, we give all of our hotlines when they become a member, and we continue to train them on communications, on how to raise awareness. Different governments work with the hotlines in their countries. Also, the departments of culture often work and give money to raise awareness of this. But I agree, it's not enough. I don't think we're doing as good a job as we can, but we need to just engage more and more people, talk more about it I'm sure you go to, when you speak to people who aren't in this area of work, they're like, oh, that exists? Wow, I didn't even know. They've seen something in a tabloid maybe once or twice, but they barely knew. They don't know the numbers we're talking about. And this is what we need to raise awareness amongst adults, so that they can talk to their children about it, and teachers and caregivers, because the children, they're like, yeah, whatever, anyway, sorry.
I'll add a couple things. Did you want to say anything, Toby?
I'm just going to say I don't know exactly how we're going to be able to do that on a social component with child exploitation, because there's humans involved and you have to convince them. We always have the saying, see something, say something needs to become digital. And this is not only true for CSAM, this is also true for technical abuse. We have constant conversations with security vendors all over the world about spam phishing, CSAM, and so on and so forth, and tell them, you have so much data, make that data available to hosting providers and ISPs. And this is an uphill battle, just to convince people to make their information available so it can be used for good. I understand there are all companies that want to make money, but if I share my explicit data with AWS as an example, for them to more or less take these things down, that should normally be a no-brainer. I've been in this business for quite a while, and unfortunately, I have to say, I'm meanwhile at a point where I'm thinking there needs to be some kind of legislation that is kind of enforcing those things. Maybe not enforcing them, but maybe just sponsoring those campaigns that need to be done to create awareness. Because I'm in the business for 22 years now, and it's like, at one point in time, it's just same.
I'll just add a couple thoughts. So I also have thought about this a ton. I built the trust and safety practice at TikTok, and before that I was at a big US-based high school social network, and I have 2 kids, and he's not going to like it, but one of them's here, he's 15, and I brought his brother last year, who's 16 and a half, and so they've come up, with devices while I'm doing trust and safety, and as you put very well, there aren't any simple solutions. I think there's 2 important things. One is, and you touched on this by talking about parents, I think it's modeling. A lot of times we talk about phone addiction and phone use, but we do the same things ourselves. And it could be, dual screen, watching TV, or texting when you're driving. I've caught myself in all these things, and you feel hypocritical. So that's one. And then 2, the education part is key, but we have to speak in the language of young people, and that is hard because it changes very rapidly. And as you pointed out, young people, they're not really going to care. And then finally, I think we need to push companies, whether it's through legislation or otherwise, to speak to their user base and the young people in the language that resonates with them. So we tried to do that at TikTok. We put in videos on screen time usage with influencers that were popular. And I think it was a step in the right direction, but now kids will increasingly use chatbots. I don't think they are yet, but they will as kind of their entree to the internet. And so the big foundation model companies have been pushed to take some steps on CSAM by public pressure, media reporting. But I think we will need to continue to try to push in using different levers, companies who are the ones we want the youth to report to speak to youth in their language and really encourage them to be good digital citizens. But easier said than done. I think we need to wrap up. So I'll just, if anyone has 30-second final thoughts, calls to action, but otherwise, this was really interesting, good learning, and it's exactly what we need to be doing. If you want to say any last words? No? Okay, we'll call it.
Well, let's work together.
And
Continue to work together.
Yeah, let's work together. Happy hour together. And
Happier together.
thanks for the work you're doing. Like, yeah, really important. Appreciate it.
Thank you to AWS, your leadership and Julia's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you.